Last month, outrage spread faster than wildfire whenever anyone spoke carelessly about the death of a public figure. News anchors paused mid-sentence. Social media erupted with reminders about respect, restraint, and basic humanity. "This isn't the time," people said. "Show decency." It became an unspoken rule, one almost everyone seemed to agree on. Grief, no matter who it belongs to, deserves dignity. That standard, many believed, should apply to everyone. No exceptions. No loopholes. No politics. And yet, when the president was asked to clarify his own remarks following the tragic death of Rob Reiner, something fractured in the national conversation. What should have been a moment of reflection instead became another dividing line, another reminder of how fragile empathy has become in public life. The response stunned people across the country, not because it was loud or aggressive, but because it was absent of something far more important: humanity. At a time when millions were still processing the loss, when tributes were pouring in from actors, writers, ordinary fans, and even longtime critics, the tone shifted. A moment that called for silence and grace was quickly pulled back into the familiar orbit of personal grievances and political defensiveness. For many Americans, that was the moment something finally clicked, not in anger, but in exhaustion. Rob Reiner's death wasn't just another headline. For generations, his work had shaped how Americans understood friendship, courage, love, and moral choice. From the courtroom intensity of A Few Good Men to the quiet nostalgia of Stand By Me, his films didn't just entertain, they stayed with people. They became part of family traditions, late-night conversations, and memories tied to who we once were. But Reiner was more than a filmmaker. He was a citizen who believed deeply in civic responsibility. He spoke up when it cost him comfort. He criticized power when silence would have been easier. Agree or disagree with his politics, few questioned his sincerity. His voice came from conviction, not convenience. When he passed, Americans didn't just mourn a Hollywood legend, they mourned a version of public discourse that feels increasingly rare. Across the country, people paused. Old interviews resurfaced. Scenes from his films played on televisions late into the night. For a brief moment, there was unity in shared memory. And then, almost abruptly, that unity was interrupted. Instead of acknowledging the weight of the moment, the conversation turned inward. The focus shifted away from loss and toward resentment. It unsettled not just critics, but members of the president's own party. People who had stood by him for years, defended him through storms, and learned to separate policy from personality. This time felt different. It wasn't outrage that followed, it was discomfort. The kind that settles quietly. The kind that doesn't trend online but shows up in conversations at dinner tables, in long pauses during interviews, in allies choosing their words more carefully than before. Around the world, the reaction was one of confusion. International media outlets replayed the remarks with disbelief. Analysts asked questions that once would have seemed unthinkable. What has happened to American leadership? When did empathy become negotiable? For decades, the United States was admired not just for its power, but for its ability to lead with dignity during moments of loss. Presidential statements following tragedy were once seen as moral anchors, brief reminders that, beyond ideology, there was shared humanity. That image has blurred. The confusion deepened when, less than a day after Reiner's passing, the former president posted online suggesting, without evidence, that political views may have played a role in the tragedy. The implication had no factual basis. It added nothing to understanding. And it felt painfully out of place. The backlash was swift, but not hysterical. Democrats condemned the remark, as expected. But so did Republicans. Conservative commentators called it unnecessary. Former allies described it as the wrong moment. Some went further, saying out loud what many had only whispered before: "This isn't who we should be." Loss of life, they said, should never be weaponized. Grief should not be filtered through ideology. Death does not belong to one party. What we are witnessing now is bigger than a single comment or a single leader. It's a turning point in how Americans process rhetoric, responsibility, and trust. Recent polling reflects something subtle but important. While many Republican voters still support Trump, enthusiasm has softened. Not vanished, but shifted. People are no longer reacting with automatic defense. There is space now for disagreement, for hesitation, for quiet reevaluation. And that shift is happening alongside a broader decline in confidence across leadership as a whole. On the economy, trade policy, and the cost of living, Americans are struggling. Grocery bills don't care about slogans. Rent doesn't respond to speeches. Job insecurity isn't eased by deflection. Across political lines, people say the same thing: life feels harder, not better. That reality has consequences, sometimes louder than speeches, sometimes quieter than headlines, but always real. In recent local elections, the results told a story many weren't expecting. In towns that rarely make national news, in districts long considered safely out of reach, Democrats flipped multiple seats. Republicans, during the same period, gained none. There were no fireworks, no triumphant speeches blasted across cable news. Just numbers on a page. But beneath those numbers was something deeper, a shift in mood, a subtle but undeniable change in direction. It didn't happen overnight. It happened in school board meetings, in city councils, in conversations at kitchen tables. It happened among people who didn't always agree with each other but shared a quiet sense that something felt off, and that staying silent wasn't an option anymore. Rob Reiner understood moments like this. He believed democracy wasn't something you visited every 4 years like a civic tourist. It was something you practiced daily, in small, often uncomfortable ways. In interviews, he spoke about the responsibility of citizens to stay engaged even when it was exhausting, even when it cost friendships, peace of mind, or professional comfort. Especially then. To him, disengagement wasn't neutrality, it was surrender. Honoring that legacy doesn't mean silence or politeness at the expense of truth. It means refusing to normalize moments where tragedy is overshadowed by ego, where grief becomes a talking point instead of a shared human experience. It means demanding empathy not as a favor, but as a baseline expectation for anyone who seeks power. History reminds us of this again and again. Real change rarely begins with dramatic speeches or viral moments. It starts when pressure builds in everyday life, financially, socially, morally. When people feel the weight of decisions in their wallets, their communities, and their consciences. When discomfort becomes impossible to ignore, awareness follows. And awareness, once awakened, is difficult to put back to sleep. There is a quiet hope threaded through moments like these. Not loud optimism, not blind faith, but a persistent belief that awareness might arrive before irreversible damage does. That people will recognize the warning signs while there's still time to choose differently. Perhaps the most striking contrast came days later. When the same leader was asked about the death of Charlie Kirk, someone he had deeply disagreed with politically, the response was different. Measured. Human. Respectful. There was no deflection, no pivot to self-interest. Just an acknowledgement of loss, of family, of life cut short. That difference did not go unnoticed. Because leadership isn't defined by how we speak to allies or supporters. It's revealed in how we respond to loss, especially when it involves those we oppose. In those moments, masks slip. Priorities surface. Values become visible. And the country watches. Not with perfection in mind. Americans are not asking for flawless leaders or scripted compassion. They're asking for decency. For pauses instead of pivots. For moments where humanity comes before headlines, where grief isn't rushed past in search of the next advantage. They're asking to feel seen, not managed. Rob Reiner's films taught generations that character matters. That the hardest choices reveal who we truly are. His passing reminded the nation of something just as important. Empathy is not weakness, and dignity is not optional. These are not luxuries reserved for good times. They are essentials, especially in moments of pain. In the end, the question isn't about one man or one comment. It's about whether the country can still recognize the line between leadership and performance. Whether grief can still unite us, even briefly. Whether we remember how to be human when it matters most. Because moments of loss don't just test leaders. They define them. And quietly, carefully, the people are taking notes.